I think I made mention of this previously when it came to Bullet for My Valentine, namely in my first piece of coverage with them when it came to Omen, their first debut track off the deluxe edition of their self-titled album. But I really wish I had been covering this band sooner. I've been a fan of Bullet for My Valentine for a very long time, but I wasn't covering music at the time the album was coming out as ravenous as I do today. I mean, I started kind of venturing into that space with Starset, which has been a long favorite rock group of mine. Again, I tend to cover other ventures in the entertainment space, namely cinema, television, gaming, things with more of a visual component. And Starset was a very unique group in their sci-fi edge, so I kind of brought them in. But music for me has been, as good as those other art forms and modes of expression are, music for me has really been a first love in my life. It's been with me in closer relationships than even people have, again, many different reasons. Some of which may be elaborate in this video, I don't know necessarily. I mean, the lyrics are deep enough that I could see it segueing in that direction. But I've wanted to talk about music for a very long time. I've wanted to be able to feature more music in the way of my favorites or just promising artists overall on this channel, or to some extent, whatever I do online, in regard to me lending a voice to what I find special and unique. Bullet for My Valentine not only has the advantage of being a favorite of mine in that they're a metal group, but they're also European. There's a lot of talent in Europe for some reason. It's very interesting, especially among rock groups. I mean, Dead by April, Blackbriar, Snow White Blood, there's a lot. And there's probably many more examples. Apocalyptica, there's so many more beyond that. But Bullet for My Valentine, over the years I've listened to them, and I've listened to a wide body of their work. Not every single track that they've released. I'm still kind of making my way through some of their older albums, but they're recent I've listened to all the way through, and I really love them. I wish I'd been covering this album sooner, because it was around the time of, actually it was delayed soon after, but it was being advertised and promoted around the time that Horizons, Starset's newest album, was being released, and the singles were coming out, and I was covering that album at the time. I even made mention in those videos of Bullet for My Valentine and Trivium. I never regret it. I wish I'd covered that album too, because that one's so stinking good. I forget the name of it, but it was a solid album as well. But Bullet for My Valentine was gearing up to release a new album, and after a bit of a delay, they finally did. And the singles were so strong from the get-go, but then on listening to that album, again, the standard edition, not the deluxe, they're combined in that all those tracks are featured here as well. I was taken aback by just how good this was. I'm like, dang, I should have covered this group. So lucky me, they put out a deluxe edition. And upon realizing that, I'm like, well, I'm not going to sit in this space of guilt anymore. I'm going to feature Bullet for My Valentine. We have some new music to talk about. And Omen was the first entrance, of course, with this album. They've got 5 tracks, I believe, they're coming out in addition to what's already been previously released. The release date's a bit out, I believe in terms of September or August. I forget when it was set. But, I don't know. I mean, we'll see if all the singles come out maybe before. Well, I imagine they probably wait at least on one for the release date, but I don't know. There's been 2 singles thus far. Omens and now Omen. Is it singular? I forget. It's now Stitch's turn to shine. And this song sounds really promising from a lyrical perspective, but with the Bullet for My Valentine energy. I liked Omen, whatever it's called, but it was a bit softer in comparison to some of the other work. I really like the harder tracks specifically on this album. And for me, a Bullet for My Valentine, the last album they had, Gravity, I liked the harder stuff, but there were a lot of softer songs in there, and I'm a much more of a metal guy. It's what I prefer in genre. The songs on here that are, and most of these ones are really hard by nature, it's very much a return to roots for Bullet for My Valentine. Paralyzed, really good. Knives, Shattered's excellent. Parasite's my favorite. And listening to at least, because I know the video is cut differently, but with the introduction that's included on that standard album, it's a beautiful track. It's even better. Love that song so much. Yes, admittedly, some swearing. I tend to prefer cleaner music, but at the very least, the message is still incredibly potent and highly resonant. I just love the energy of that track. I'm hoping for something along those lines. It's pretty deep based on a lyrical inspection. I've already kind of perused the message of the song, but we are going to listen to the song together and add a tune to what's a pretty, I think, resonant and deep exploration of adversity and pain and working through that. Again, we'll look at the lyrics in greater depth. I'm going to cue up the visualizer, which are always a lot of fun to watch. That's what's happened so far for Knives. Well, actually, I think the majority of singles come out for all of them. They're not official music videos. They're just kind of you can see the band performing or singing. Shattered's my favorite. Again, that song is so good, but the visuals for that, excellent. Those stick with you. But let's give Stitches a try and see where this lands in terms of my appreciation on the album and where this would rank between what we've heard of the deluxe thus far. Here we go. I'm going to cue it up. We can enjoy this for ourselves together. Hang on. Okay. Hang on. It's not ready yet. All right. So much technical stuff to make this work. Ooh, kaleidoscope effect. I like a slower entrance. It's an ominous tone. I think that's helped by the red coloring. You knew we were building up. Here's the crescendo. Standard dark riff, heavy but excellent. Good entrance, sets the mood. I love this guy's voice. Like I said, Europe has some real treats. Nice. Right along the lines of what I like this album. Told you, the lyrics are deep, though. We'll talk about them after. They require deeper exploration. Nice. Yeah, it's harder version of this. I guess the entrance was the chorus. That's good. I like the placement of that. But I like the twist here. Ah, beautiful range too. Ah, I love this. In my opinion, better than Omens. Omens is good, but this is superior. Really showcasing BFNB's strengths. Admittedly, I was thinking you're improving. Maybe they quicken it later, but it's fine. I like the slower pace of that line, sever the ties. There's gonna like sever the ties, you know, being like faster energy. It's okay. They sometimes change midway in their songs. There's some variation. This is a great visualizer too. Alright, here we go. Bit of a change. Forget this guy's name, but his vocal styles, I love the aggression. There we go. Are we gonna... Yes? The familiar riff. This guy's super talented too. I mean, I have guitar envy. I never learned, but this guy's really talented. So what's the issue? I don't see the point in suffering. It's enjoyable. Still got a minute left of the song, so there's still plenty of time to enjoy it. It's longer too. I didn't realize we're already at the 4-minute mark. That's good. I appreciate the frame. It's like, let's enjoy this a little more because it's just so good. Yep, and on a high note. I almost feel like watching that. I wonder if this was performed as, like, you know, an in-studio video. I mean, a couple of these backdrops, like, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of behind the scenes in terms of the formation of this song, but that's beautiful. High energy. Really establishes Bullet for My Valentine's strengths and why I love them so much. Again, I don't know why it's European groups that have... I like American music, but why is it Europe has the best groups in regard to the rock genre and metal genre? I don't know. But I appreciate that there's at least, you know, some talent out that way and that it's made its way overseas, because I love this group. I've been a fan, again, like I said, for a very long time. And Stitches really highlights the strengths of this group. I think it has a much, in my opinion, superior track to Omen. And Omen is still fine, but I like the rougher edge that Bullet for My Valentine has. It's a faster pace, and I think the tune and the key they chose and the energy, as well as the vocals, I forget the frontman's name, but he's just so talented in regard to both, you know, his more melodic stuff, but then when he starts to growl and the scream, I love this guy. I wonder if the other tracks that are going to be included after this one in subsequent order are going to follow in energy. I hope they do. Because, I mean, this follows in the tonality of the other tracks that are so dominant within their self-titled album. And all the hard tracks are hard hitters. The softer ones are too. And the lyrics as well. I mean, it helps to amplify, to balance the song with a really good message. You know, and I think with this one, it's a particularly resonant theme, imagining different scars that people have experienced, however you want to personalize that. I mean, it could be anything. I mean, in terms of maybe just life's obstacles or issues that, you know, you've personally gone through or mistakes you've made, and you're sort of in that space of resting, thinking about them. But not necessarily resting. I mean, it's not at all a peaceful or blissful rest. But we've all experienced scars. We've all experienced wounds to varying severities and situations. And the way that this personalizes it is really interesting. Even I can look at this and see elements of my own life and my story captured in different wounds I've experienced that... Even some stitches are a bit closed, you know, they're making their way towards a healing process, but others are still gaping wounds that require further medical attention. I guess put it in style to what they wrote here. But there are some lines that really stand out. I mean, again, I think it's very easy to follow with the song and the way that it's written. It's pretty literal. It's not that poetic in comparison to other rock groups I listen to that prefer more of an abstract style in the illustration. This is much more practical, and just I think what they're going for is a feeling of relatability and understanding, right? Just going through adversity. It's a very human thing. We live in a fallen world. We all experience the adversity of life and just different challenges and situations. And I think this project captures that very nicely. Well, in fact, you know, a lot of their songs are more literal. Come to think of it, on the self-titled album, I think some really speak to different issues. I mean, they always have, but over the course of their work. But in particular with this album, I think there's some tracks that are much more deliberately literal in the way they articulate their themes and their stories and their messages. But I mean, there are lines that stand out. I mean, this particular second stanza, I find this interesting as a Christian. Because, I mean, on the first perusing, I'm like, well, you know, some words stood out here. But I think this is one of the stronger stanzas here, besides the ones that deal more with the theme, again, of healing from wounds and scarring. And I'll just kind of begin reading off. I guess technically it's the first verse, because the opening verse here was... more so the chorus. And I guess we could call this verse 1. Fake, I never face, I never intervention. Eyes of the enemy resist my reflection. I like the idea of, you know, reflection image. As an English major and a writer, I've preferred, you know, the poetry genre. You know, and you speak of poetic lyrics, it's kind of in my avenue of writing. I prefer the more visual. Probably the reason I think that this makes the songs, again, the visual here, by the way, in terms of what they've done in the past, I think Shattered is pretty strong. You know, I think it's the reigning champion creatively, just because it was so much fun to watch. But this one's good too. I like the red outlook, and it does paint a more ominous and malevolent picture between that. I think it does accompany the energy of where the lyrics are going. But in terms of like visual keywords within the stanza here, I think reflection is a good choice, and it reminds me a lot of a way that I imagine healing, in fact, from stitches and different wounds is through a mirror image. I experiment a lot with this. You know, some people may say I favor this image a bit too much. it's a go-to example for me, because again, I like the idea of duality and reflection and looking at an image of yourself and considering who you are and processing in that manner. But I like to write from the perspective of mirrors, in terms of like what you see in the mirror, right, versus who you recognize yourself to be, whether that's externally or internally. So I like the use of the word there, but it goes on. Come and make another cut, a little neat incision, feed on the misery that breeds in your suspicion. This is so well written. I'm a sacrifice, antichrist, anarchist, nihilist. Like, they really dig deep in regard to the emotions. Now cut a little deeper, hate another death, another crucifixion. Reading this particular line in the middle, where he says, I'm a sacrifice, antichrist, anarchist, nihilist. Being a Christian, I automatically, recognize the antichrist word. There's a couple analogies here. You could say maybe you could broaden this out to a historical perspective. Crucifixions, you can think back, into ancient times. But there's a biblical point. You can look at this too. I think there's a religious analogy to be made. I think you can easily extrapolate it that way. But the use of the word antichrist, I found very interesting, right? Maybe you consider all those words, and it seems like, again, a very negative person overall. I think it's interesting to consider the perspective of the way this is written, like in terms of the lyrics, that it's not necessarily like you're attributing this yourself. I don't know. Again, like I see two people in this particular stanza, like obviously the victim versus the aggressor. But more it's like feed on the misery that breeds in your suspicion. That's coming again from the violence that's been enacted and the harm on you. But like, I am all these things. This is your perception. Like someone's giving in terms of accepting those wounds. Not that anyone should. But when I read the lyrics for the first time, it reminded me a lot of growing up as a kid. And this might be a bit of a dark illustration, but perhaps I can, use this. You can look at this as a means of, personally taking the song, considering perhaps where you see yourself in it as well. I like to do this in music, and maybe it's a bit familiar for me, and maybe more time consuming than people would prefer, but I like to analyze lyrics on a deeper level and see where the practical application is. And this song, again, is particularly relevant for this. I see that line, and actually, this is a memory that kind of floats in with me from time to time. I don't oftentimes think about it. It's just sort of, again, like a fleeting thought. Maybe because it's just so dark and dreary and dismal to consider. So in some way, my brain has suppressed it. But when I read this song, it's like, you see a cue word or something, some visual, and you're like, boom, there goes the memory, because it's instantaneous. This reminds me a lot. The scars that I have experienced personally, as I said, there's a wide range of what one can be wounded by and how severe that puncture can go. But as a kid, I experienced a lot of wounds. There are some wounds that have healed, many that I still carry with me and that I'm still in the process of healing from. And that's actually, a factor of why I love music so much, and why I ventured into the space to a degree. There's always multiple reasons for everything I do in life, but bringing music onto this channel, as I said, it's a first love for me, in terms of artistic expression. But music for me, I'm sure probably other people can relate, it's a means of therapy. And a means of comprehension, understanding, and healing. It can have that effect. It's part of the reason I'm starting a new channel that's going to be specifically themed around music that is tied into this. This is more based on first impressions, but music that's resonated with me in terms of the different stitches that I've experienced, and what I've lived through, or just, good songs overall, good expressions of art and culture and edifying pieces of entertainment and teaching. I want to feature a wide range, in terms of artists that have really influenced me over the years. And Symphonies and Small Talk, which is the new channel I've got coming up, which is going to be integrated again based on, this is more first impressions on new stuff, and that channel is going to be more based on music that's really left a legacy and an effect on me, and really made an impression, whether they be very well-known groups, lesser known groups, maybe more establishing, whether they're whatever genre they pertain to. I've already got a list that's growing and kind of spreading out across the spectrum. Bullet for My Valentine will be making an appearance because they have plenty of songs that, including, I think Parasite will be one, because it's so good. But songs that have really stuck with me, they will be highlighted there. When I read these lyrics, as I said, music for me has been a very therapeutic element, in particular because it's been closer to me than many people have. And I had to live that way. I'm not going to go into details completely on this, other than saying that when I read that fifth line in that verse, it reminds me of how I coped with stress and the many wounds that I experienced. And again, like I said, I'm not going to go into detail, particularly because the story goes all sorts of different ways. We're going to touch on some of these things as I go through Symphonies of Small Talk. I already have a couple songs in mind that we can unravel, at least some of the strands, but I want to keep this at least very simplified. So I'll leave it at, I had a lot of self-hatred as a kid, and it left me with a very negative disposition of myself. And that could be just from mistakes that I made, and I made plenty. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and profess to be perfect. I mean, just the fact that I'm so open about my faith and being a Christian, like, obviously that'd be a lie if I were trying to portray, I'm the saint here. I'm really not. No one is. But, unless, maybe God considers it differently. But for me, it's like, well, I understand that, in the temporal world, we're not perfect, and I'm not beyond that, certainly. But as a kid, I went through a lot. I received a lot of wounds, whatever they would be, ranging from mean, jokes or just disparaging remarks to long-sustained emotional hurts. For me, each wound that I experienced, some again were small, but others were large. But in the way that I developed, those wounds just stacked upon one another. And as a teenager, especially, I had a lot of self-hatred within me. And it's not something that I often talk about. The results, you'd be surprised by how far it went in terms of an extent. And well, actually, it developed since I was a kid. But if I told you the truth, and I will, maybe eventually, not yet, I'm waiting for the right opportunity, and I have one in mind. As I said with Symphonies and Small Talk, it's coming. I want to be open and honest about everything, but there's a season to everything. So I'll say at the very least, for factors that I was unaware of, and influences in my life that you could say bad actors. I don't necessarily mean entirely persons. To some extent, that's true. But you could say bad actors in the sense of like a malevolent force, perhaps. Not as supernatural, just in emotions and just overall well-being. There were factors that were integral in why self-hatred was such a dominant emotion in my life. And even though I have healed from where I used to be as a kid, to some degree because those emotions were long sustained, and they're still in some ways gaping wounds that are in need of a good stitch, at least at some point, if I can find the right doctor. I don't know. I don't mean that literally. I'm a healthy guy by all things that are considered, in terms of exterior perception. It's just the internal that needs a lot of self correction. But I remember as a kid that my self-hatred, as bizarre as this is going to sound, went into the extent of having just an overall negative look all the time, even if I didn't necessarily communicate that directly or indirectly with other people. I'm a very clandestine individual by nature, particularly because, again, of the factors that helped define me by the hurt I experienced. It left me in this position where I was very emotionally weakened. Should I just say it? I don't know. Again, I won't go into detail. I already did say I was bullied as a kid. I was also emotionally abused. That leaves with someone a lot of, it messes with your emotions and it messes with who you are as an individual. If you were to do, and I'm a psychology major, so it's something that it's been a particular study of mine, largely to best understand, what exactly did I experience in the full magnitude? Because again, well, I know I didn't say this. Music for me, as I said, was closer in relationship to me than other people were. Largely because other people did not help correct these issues. In particular, because I was a kid, and your emotions are sometimes very uncomfortable to talk about, especially when you're a guy. Guys aren't oftentimes that open about their emotions, although I'm very different. I used to be very open about my emotions. Not about that, though, because again, I was a kid, I didn't know. But my self-hatred was pretty extensive and deep, to the point that every minute of my life, in some way, I just saw myself as this horrible person. And it did go to the extent, as crazy and as psychotic as this sounds, to the point where I basically said, from what I was experiencing, whether it be just feeling condemnation over my own mistakes or inferring what other people thought of me based upon different facial cues, body language, and just, their overall interaction with me and things that would be said, I just really started to have this outlook over time that built up within me of, I'm just this horrible person. As far as it going into me believing that the bad nature in me was a character default that couldn't be changed. as a kid, not that I accepted this willingly. I certainly didn't. I wasn't proud of the fact that I was hurt. No kid really is. But I was hurting so much and believing that I was just this horrible person that I actually told myself as a kid. I remember this. And it was a song that kind of reminded me of it, even though, again, it's a memory because it's so negative. It floats in and out. I remember telling myself as a kid that I must be the Antichrist. In terms of what's discussed in the Bible about, basically the son of the devil, just the counteraction to Christ. Not that, again, I believed it. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how far my self-view went, in that I just despised myself for mistakes I thought I couldn't change. And there were many reasons, again, as to why, or many paths where the emotional abuse found a placeholder in my life. And one of those, again, was in the self-blame. And to some extent, as a kid, because I was silently trying to work through that and I didn't have anyone helping me, I looked toward myself in regard to where to manifest change. Because I was raised, thinking in context of the Bible. I forget the verses, by the passage numbers. Of course, the book of Matthew, I think it's in chapter 7. It's in the Beatitude, talks about, not judging others, and then you being judged by the same measure that you condemn others in your outlooks and your opinions on them. But there's also another verse. It might be in that context or it might be somewhere else. I forget where it is. But the Bible uses the illustration of a speck versus a peg, right? Don't judge your neighbor or your brother for the speck in their eye when you've got the plank in your own. But as a kid, I took that verse into mind, and partly because I was raised, on the idea, right, that change starts from within, right? And if your world isn't serviceable to you or in some way is not properly functioning, you work within and sort of, go by trial and error like you would on a checklist, mark things off, right? You consider, okay, where is this problem, right? You just go down the list, but you start with yourself and you work out, right? Before you can change others around you, you look within to see, is there any circumstance that I could correct to best mediate, healing and manifest it through just making changes, whatever that might entail. Again, circumstances might vary from person to person, story to story. As a kid, though, I took things a bit too far, and then I personalized everything because, like I said, I was basically coping through healing with emotional abuse through internalizing, right? Looking within, being silent about what I was going through and just making all these character changes when, yeah, there were mistakes that I made. I have my own closet of demons in my life, but everyone does. But I looked to myself way too much. I started blaming myself for a lot of issues that other people and other situations were the means to where emotional abuse manifests. And so I started blaming myself and taking responsibility for things that were never my fault. And that in large part helped, I think, manifest. And there were plenty of other components, many of which will be, again, I've tried to simplify this best I can. There are plenty of strands to pull here in regard to my story of emotional abuse. And some of those I already know for certain will make an appearance on Symphonies of Small Talk. I already have some songs in mind directly dealing with the issue. Whether, the artist knew that or not. Again, I interpret music a bit differently because some music is a bit open-ended in the way you can personalize it. But as far as, I'm concerned when it came to the abuse I experienced and the self-hatred I felt, because it largely stemmed from that. And plus, I was a kid. I was emotionally abused for 21 years. That's how long it was sustained. I didn't know until I turned 21 in October of 2018, so it's fairly recent. And I've been working in the background ever since to fix a lot of the issues that now I see. Well, maybe not every problem I faulted myself for was my issue. Maybe it was somebody else or something else in my life. Maybe we should start, maybe I was a kid though. I mean, I could have looked out, extrinsically for help, but how many people were, some were, and a lot of people, I've talked about personally, they know about, and there are people in my life that do care, but there are just sometimes people that I'm like, well, you saw things. I'm not going to go on that tangent. Anyway, it's still an experience I'm working through, but it sounds dark. But when I read the lyrics, I'm like, I have a deep resonance for songs like this that do dive into the thick of things in regard to human emotion and how you feel. This song is no different in terms of my perception from other bands that, it's specifically within the rock genre. I've talked about that too. It's interesting for me to see with rock. And I think this is part of the reason I respect it so much, not just because, rock music in particular, the style and the brashness of it, it's just more appealing to me from an artistic perspective. But I don't know why, but like I find rock music, and I'll tell you, I've gotten the critical glances from people outside, my lens or whoever that might be. I've gotten the sideways glare of like, oh, you listen to rock music, you heathen. It's like, hey, I'm a Christian. I can be a fan of rock music. There are plenty of Christian rock groups these days. Like maybe, and then, hey, the worship music is good too. But I mean, even secular bands can be great. It's like, some judgment necessarily isn't the most warranted. And some people tend to be more individualistic to perhaps the chagrin of others. But when it comes to rock music, I've gravitated towards it because I see a depth with it. And other people would say, to different extensions of music, they could find the same resonance in other types of styles and genres. But for me, I really see this within rock groups. I don't know if it's necessarily just maybe a change in the culture or a change in the world or the times or just artist passion. But I really see a deep motivation within a lot of well-known rock artists, or maybe just up-and-coming ones, to tackle the hard issues of life, whether it be more concrete in illustration, or whether it's more elusive or abstract, like of emotions. Reading this song, basically a whole account of the feeling of experiencing a lot of wounds on your life. And I'd say for me, when it comes to Stitches, I've sustained a lot. I guess to best imagine, this might be a bit of a graphic illustration, but if I had to, illustrate in some way the effect of emotional abuse, forget the crinkled heart analogy. I dealt with that, in first grade. And it was a sad story, but it's like, that's a much lesser tier. I wish it were that simple. The emotional abuse I experienced, somehow I'm still sane, but my heart was slashed 1,000 different ways. It's like, I don't know, I don't know how to this day I've sustained as much damage as I have, and yet I'm still somehow with it enough, maybe just in a growing awareness of what I've experienced, but, and just learning, this is the reality I lived in, where as a kid, I didn't know everything, and to some extent I was lied to. Anyway, there's so many stories we could go on. I'm going to wrap this up. Great message. Love the potency here. It's a very strong piece from a writing perspective and the themes you can extract and how you can personally apply it in your life. But from a musical perspective, this is very much in line with Bullet for My Valentine. I love them. Fan favorite for a long time. Just with many other European groups too. But this is a particularly strong track, and I do think it is closer to the more prominent and recognizable, at least for me, tracks I've loved off the last album. And again, I have my regrets in not covering the album in its totality. Some tracks, because of my regrets, I might factor them into Symphonies and Small Talk, come to think of it. I mean, again, like I said, Parasite probably will be appearing there, as well as maybe a couple of other tracks. Parasite. I almost said Paralyzed. Maybe Paralyzed too. Who knows? I'll have to see what the roster holds, currently. But I really liked this. I do think it's a very strong release off the album. It fits right in nature with where Bullet for My Valentine has been as a band. I think it's another strong debut for them. What are your guys' thoughts with this group? Perhaps for you, this is the first introduction to Bullet for My Valentine. If so, welcome. You've met a very talented European rock group. And of course, they've had plenty of good projects and songs in the past that I would happily recommend. But I'm interested to hear your comments if maybe you're a new entry. But for those of you who are long-time Bullet for My Valentine fans, what do you think of the song? Do you think it ranks up to where they've been as a band in the formative, the more recent years, and just has that strength to it? Do you think the message, how does it apply to you? Maybe, some people reading on the lyrics, maybe hearing my story, you feel compelled to share yours. And just, again, because we can find connection, in perhaps the sadness of life, we can find some happiness in that too, and in communication and healing and finding fellowship. Where do you feel this track fits, from, in the deluxe album specifically? Or maybe you could just consider the album overall, considering the first standard release and all 10 tracks. What is your favorite thus far? In terms of the energy, maybe you prefer some of the softer stuff, maybe you prefer, again, the more aggressive. And do you agree with me that perhaps is a bit stronger than Omen? Contribute all your thoughts down below. Feel free to do so. But like I stated, another hard hitter for Bullet for Valentine. We got a bit of a ways to wait for the other free tracks to release. I'm sure there'll probably be another single at some point. Maybe all 3 will come out. Who knows? But I'm really looking forward to the future with this group. I loved the full-length album, but these deluxe tracks are really good. And I appreciate more stuff, of course, for Bullet for Valentine. But Stitches, it's a nice entry. I really like this song. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.